Good morning.
Good morning.
This is the April 7th Board of Commissioners meeting for Blue Earth County. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have our agenda review, Bob.
Mr. Chair, there are no changes to the agenda this morning.
I'll move the agenda.
Second?
Got a motion by Mark, a second by Commissioner Landcamer. Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, Jesse, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Landcamer?
Aye.
Commissioner People?
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis?
Aye.
Commissioner Brunder?
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg?
Aye. That passes. We're going to jump right into Public Works with our county engineer, Ryan Tilges.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning, Brian.
Well, the first item of business today is consideration of bids for our 2020 maintenance gravel hauling contract. We received 3 bids this year. Max Johnson Trucking was the apparent low bidder. I'm sorry, they've got these jumbled up. R&E Enterprises is the apparent low bidder at $228,000. You can see the unit prices from last year's solicitations and the unit prices from Max Johnson, R&E, and Green Dream for the maintenance gravel hauling of 850,000 ton miles of gravel and a loader for 40,000 tons of loading out the material. So with that, I would recommend approval to R&E Enterprises.
I'd move approval.
I'll second. Well, Mark People, second the motion.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Jesse, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Landcamer?
Aye.
Commissioner People?
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis?
Aye.
Commissioner Brunder?
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg?
Aye. That passes.
Okay, thank you. Second action item for today is consideration of bids for the 2020 CRS2 bituminous material for our maintenance seal coating operations. This year we received 3 bids: Flint Hills Resources, Jebro, and HG Meigs. The low bidder was HG Meigs at a total of $410,500. So this is actually about $40,000 less than last year's bids with the recent fuel prices. So I would recommend award to HG Meigs.
I'll move awarding the bid to HG Meigs. This is Landcamer.
Mark.
Second, Brunder.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Very close.
Any discussion? It's interesting to see what those gas prices will do to our road stuff. Jesse, could you call the roll?
Commissioner Landcamer?
Aye.
Commissioner People?
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis?
Aye.
Commissioner Brunder?
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg?
Aye. That passes.
All right, thank you. Action item number 3, consideration of bids for the 2020 traffic painting. We received 2 bids, AAA Striping and Traffic Marking Specialties. AAA was the low bidder at $208,100. As you can see, this is above last year's prices. However, per previous county board directives, we have increased our quantities to try to enhance the striping throughout the county and keep our traffic markings more fresh, so we are working towards additional safety measures. So this is a county-wide safety measure with the enhanced striping that we're adding.
Okay.
Brunder will move AAA striping.
I'll second. People will second the AAA striping.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
that's nice to see that we're upgrading that, because those fog lines are so valuable. Very nice to see.
Yep, that's, the beads in here, is that those reflective beads or
They're
what?
reflective glass beads that are mixed in with the paint or applied after the fact. And those are what really give that paint the retro reflectivity so that your lights shine off of it at night.
Right. And I know there's a lot of that paint striping now that the newer vehicles actually can drive down the road and they
Using the cameras or guiding
using the
off of
cameras,
it.
it etches people back in the center and stops the accidents and stuff. So that's very important. So, Jesse, could you call a roll?
Commissioner Landcamer,
Aye.
Commissioner People,
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis.
Aye.
Commissioner Bronder,
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg.
Aye. Right.
All right. Our last action item, our fourth action item, not our last, is consideration of bids for a new front end loader. This was initially budgeted for the replacement and trade-in of one of our existing units. However, we had a case tractor loader unit in our Vernon Center shop that the engine blew up, and the cost to repair it exceeded the value of this very old tractor. We had a front end loader on our deferred equipment, I think for year 2022, if I remember correctly, and that was the unit that would be replacing that tractor loader. It would also be used to run one of the loader mounted snow blowers in the winter. That was also an additional deferred equipment item. So speaking with Bob, we determined it was best to move forward with the acquisition of a new front end loader, retain the one that we were going to trade in until that 2022 budgeted unit.
Okay.
So this is an extra unit that would help us, and then that unit we were going to trade in this year will just be deferred until 22 in that budgeted year, and then will be traded in then. So we're basically swapping where the trade-in goes. We're still acquiring a new unit and trading one in. It's just we're deferring the trade-in by 2 years. So if you look at net cost to the county over the 2 years, it's fairly minimal. It's just we're seeing it now in 2020 instead of 2022. So we had 2 bids, Ziegler Caterpillar and RDO Equipment for a John Deere for comparably spec'd equipment. The John Deere 644L was considerably less expensive at $237,442. The Caterpillar was $298,010. The John Deeres have worked very well for us for the purposes and the need, and they've been very reliable, and we've been very happy with the service that we've received. So with that being said, I would recommend approval to RDO Equipment for the John Deere 644L, $237,442.
Landcamer moves RDL equipment for the John Deere.
Purvis seconds.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? I had some discussion with Bob yesterday on whether we should be purchasing the large equipment now that with the unknown what's going to happen with our tax base and everything with the COVID-19. I think we came to a pretty much of an understanding, just like what you said earlier on. It costs us more to repair and upgrade a vehicle that we have than it would to buy a new one, especially when you talk about the cost of if one breaks down, there's the personnel time that's lost and issues that can happen with that. So with that, of course, I'm supporting this. I'm very questionable right now with the whole tax base issue that we might have, but I'm certainly supporting this. Without any other discussion, Jesse, you want to call the roll?
Commissioner Landcamer,
Aye.
Commissioner People,
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis.
Aye.
Commissioner Bronder,
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg.
Aye.
Thank you. I certainly understand the concerns. I think we're going to see, I know we'll see a downturn in our transportation revenue, and we will be adjusting our program in the future accordingly. We're also trying to get ourselves poised. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but if there is potential for a stimulus package, to have some bridges on the shelf ready to go and try to get some projects out of that potential federal dollars. So we certainly understand there will be ramifications from this downturn.
Yep.
On a sidebar note, we did look at, the only equipment we could find that was something we would even be interested in was about $50,000 for a used tractor backhoe. And again, that wasn't something that'd be able to run the future snow blower. So the loaders are much more productive at the shops for the purpose that we're using them for.
Thank you for that.
Yes. We have a resolution supporting the Minnesota River Trail from St. Peter to Mankato. I did attach the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources letter requesting this resolution from the county board. They've requested the county and city concurrence. We did get St. Peter's concurrence for the trail. So this is for the Minnesota DNR trail that the legislature has approved the study of and potentially the funding of from Mankato to St. Peter. Been working with the DNR over the last 3 to 4 years looking at alternative routes. It's very difficult to find a route from Mankato to St. Peter. Uniman was an option, however, they weren't willing to facilitate all of the uses that the DNR required for their trail. Now with the uncertainty of their ownership and operation, they are looking at running along Highway 22 for the most part, and perhaps adding some scenic amenities to that trail option, but it could be incorporated into the Highway 22 design. From an efficiency standpoint, I think that's really the only viable way that the trail is going to be constructed anytime soon. So this resolution is supporting the design and the location of that trail. I did also just receive this morning a letter from MnDOT requesting this resolution as well. I'm more than happy to leave that with the board if you'd like, or I could email it after the fact, but both agencies are supportive of this project and wanting our concurrence and support.
Landcamera moves approval.
I'll second it. Mark People will second it. If I can say that this was kind of been a long time coming.
Yes.
Of course, we were looking more at off 169, but this would be the best we can do. But it's good to finally proceed with it.
Any more discussion?
This is Colleen Landcamera. I think as long as they're redoing the road, it only makes sense to do a trail. I mean, that's kind of always been the way we've done it, is when a road's redone, we try to put an amenity like a trail on. So it's a good thing.
Absolutely. And sorry to jump in, but it did take some turnover at the city of St. Peter. They were originally sticking to their guns, wanting it along the river. And I agree, the river would have been a much more scenic opportunity, but with the number of private landowners that were not in support of this project, I didn't anticipate it going anywhere anytime soon.
I know a number of those landowners would rather use their land for hunting deer than to allow people riding
It
bikes.
is a
and walking
utopia
through.
of deer hunting, especially because it's archery only, the majority of it, and there's a lot of deer down there. In fact, most of it you can actually get a bonus tag.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It would be a great ride to St. Peter and back. It would be nice to get along the river. That's always nice to be able to have that scenic part, but just having that ability to ride safely. I remember the days back when I was doing the MS Tram, and I was doing I was getting myself in shape for that, which is a ride across the state of Minnesota. And I'd ride up 169 to St. Peter, or take 99 to Nicollet, and then 14 on the way back. And of course, back then they were, 14 and 99 are both 2 lanes, and it probably wasn't the safest route, but it would be nice to have a nice, safe route to St. Peter. So that'd be great. Jesse, could you call a roll?
Commissioner Landcamer?
Aye.
Commissioner People?
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis?
Aye.
Commissioner Browner?
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg?
Aye. Looks like we're done with the action items.
Yes. On to a discussion item, and I know we may not have resolution to this today, but I at least wanted to plant the seed, and I know there have been perhaps some other conversations in one-on-one settings. But the county parks and campgrounds are scheduled to open May 1st with the COVID-19 pandemic impacts. There's not, to my understanding yet, any guidance requiring closure of campgrounds. However, it may be obviously prudent to consider that and have discussion of whether or not we want to open all of the parks, some of the parks, or and also kind of a sidebar conversation on how do we want to address camping. We discussed at the work session that we were going to keep the Rapidan Park campground closed until at least May 1st and then open it in concurrence with the rest of the county parks. We are getting to a point where we're going to delay taking the deposits that are required for the campsites because refunding them is considerable hassle. We have to set up a vendor account and make the payment to the people. So it's a fair amount of accounting work for our staff. So we're just going to try to avoid that. But with that being said, the campground options would be obviously a delayed opening and say we're going to wait until May 15th or June 1st, Memorial Day weekend. I don't really know yet, depending on how this comes out. Or consider a partial opening, perhaps with camping only and closing off some of the more public areas. Obviously, I think we're going to see additional guidance and directives from the governor yet this week that will have another bearing. But perhaps we could pick this conversation up again too. I could come in 2 weeks and we could have this conversation. But I guess I just would like some direction from the board on your thoughts about the best practice for our campgrounds. I know we've got commissioners that RV camp like myself, and I think some of us think it'd be nice to be able to get out of the house, and but I also understand that there is risk of with the restroom facilities and things like that. You know, are people going to appropriately distance themselves?
This is Langhammer. I guess I think we should follow the governor's directive, and he's saying stay home, and I think opening it up to camping could be a challenge, and people don't mean to, but they get together, and I just think, from my perspective, we're better off waiting. And I don't know what that date is, but I think the governor might have some direction.
One thing I did just see is that Iowa's governor also actually closed campgrounds until April 30th. I would anticipate that maybe kick down the road even farther as well. So,
And
which doesn't affect us because ours don't open up until May 1st.
Correct, but just as a informational item, I guess.
But of course, Iowa's campgrounds would open up before ours would because of the weather issues.
Right.
Like you said, for those of us that do camp, you're being pulled in both directions.
Yes.
We don't have an issue with locking the restrooms. That has to happen. But the problem is how do you stop people, especially like Memorial Day weekend? How do you stop families from getting together and getting into a large group? I mean, so many times I'll go down and there'll be 4 to 6 campers that are in one family that come into the campground, and of course they're all barbecuing and enjoying themselves in one large area. I don't know if I want to be the person that says that's a good idea, but I do think we should follow the governor's order. I wouldn't have any problem with coming out and saying let's do like May 15th and hold on and then see what happens from there, because with that we'd have at least 2 more board meetings to consider something.
Yep.
I wouldn't have a problem with that at all. Of course, I don't think we need to have a board vote on this, do we? I think that's something.
Not at this point, no, and I don't know that we even need an official action. I just am, again, looking for discussion. And
but I wouldn't have a problem holding it on till May 15th, but I don't know what the rest of them think.
I guess my thought is probably my target date would be Memorial Day weekend. I mean, that's when most people are going to be out there wanting to go camping. Before that, I think we've got some time to make that decision. But I agree too that we should follow the guidelines set out by the governor.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Maybe maybe the other commissioners have any other.
Brunder here, and I certainly concur with Colleen and Will. We need to follow the governor's recommendations at this point, and just, I wouldn't even have a problem extending that authority to you to just make those decisions as the governor's stuff rolls out, unless you think it's too soon, and we think it's too soon. But I'm on board with that.
I would have no problem with that at all.
This is Langhammer. I don't think we should take any reservations till we have a firm date.
Or at least the deposit.
That's what I mean.
Yes, yeah.
We've already
Deposits.
taken reservations. In fact, they're filled out throughout the year, probably. But
It's hopping.
Thanks for checking me. Deposits.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think we've got time for discussion. The other thing about Iowa is they have not instituted stay at home yet, so I don't know if I
That's
want to
what-
pay a lot of attention to them.
That's what I was saying, Commissioner People, that's why I was saying that. Yeah.
I do not off of the top of my head. I can certainly check and bring you back an update in 2 weeks if that's what you'd like. And we can
From
have additional
who? I
discussion.
couldn't hear that.
I'm sorry. I said I could also check. I'm not sure what the state parks are doing. We can look into that, and I can provide an update in 2 weeks if you'd like, or I can wait until
that'd be good.
subsequent board meeting. Okay, I'll bring that back in 2 weeks for an update.
Great.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so informational items on our construction projects. The Kern Bridge removal and salvage, the disassembly is completed. It's all boxed up into our 3 to 4 shipping containers. Mike's finalizing the manifest for all of the components to document that they're all put in there. The contractor's touching up the grading on site. They should have that done with the exception of the turf establishment this week. So,
Wow.
yeah, we're happy to have that one behind us and to have saved that very significant historic bridge. Now we're just excited to see who's going to get in line, and hopefully it goes back up and lives a long life yet. So time will tell. I've actually asked MnDOT if I could sit in on the selection committee for the future ownership of it so that we could review the applications, because I just am a little bit curious now to see and hopefully be able to help steer the direction of maybe where it goes in the future a little bit, or add my 2 cents.
Do they have a list yet? Or?
Not yet. They're going to be issuing the solicitation, but obviously with all of this going on, it makes it hard for local governments to get around that idea, I think, so there may be a bit of a delay. Yeah. CASA 10 from east of Vernon Center to 1. The bids are awarded to Mathewitz Construction. The contracts are completed. We anticipate starting construction in early May. The 2020 overlays awarded to OMG, now MPM, Minnesota Paving Materials. We anticipate they'll start in late April or early May. Our planning projects, CASA 27 from 17 to 2. Still waiting for the Army Corps permit. The right-of-way acquisitions are ongoing. However, I would state that they are slowed with the pandemic. Jack and Ryan are having phone conversations with most of the landowners out there. They're mailing out documents and then discussing them over the phone. It's a slower process. We're struggling with how to, we're at least accepting signatures on our written offers so that at least we have a fairly good faith document that we can move forward with the project. And then if they're able to go have their signature on the deed notarized by someone else, we're able to record that and make the payment on the property.
I read online, and I don't know if it's true or not, that people can notarize something electronically.
I'm
It
not
was news to me.
sure about that, because we were even discussing, and we referred it to an attorney on whether we could do a video documentation of them signing
Okay.
the document, and then our staff could notarize it. And we were informed that that would not be admissible or acceptable practice. So we're looking for alternatives. So I'll check into that.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I read it, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, if it's on the internet, you know it's going to be true.
Well, yeah, that's the challenge.
We also have about 15 transmission line power poles for Great River Energy that are on private easement, those will have to be relocated at the county's expense as part of the project costs. It was more than I had budgeted. I did have some budgeted toward it. So we're working with their staff and their legal group on the relocation agreement. The majority of those poles we would put right at the outer edge of our right-of-way so that we're avoiding additional impacts to the landowners out there and incurred costs for obviously additional easement acquisition that we would have to pay for. So part of the project, and definitely not the first one we've had to relocate power poles on, definitely not the last, but we will be bringing an agreement forward in the future for that. CSAH 1 and Good Thunder, opening bids on April 29th for a May construction start. 57 Riverfront Drive roundabout interchange at US Highway 14. We resubmitted the final geometric layout to the Geometric Design Support Unit for their approval, and we're hopeful that third time's a charm and it will be accepted and we can actually get to designing the thing to a level of detail. The 41 bridge replacement, final plans are going to the state this week for approval. We're working on right-of-way acquisitions with the 3 parcels that are required. We're anticipating a June construction start. The tree removals do need to happen prior to that, so we're going to get a quote for the tree removals and have a contractor take care of that as soon as we get the right-of-way acquired prior to the June 1st. If we don't get them done by June 1st, then we have to wait until later in the summer because of the northern long-eared bat protection, even though there aren't any hibernaculums in our county, so the threatened and endangered species requirements. County State Highway 1 from 9 to 90. I got very good news last week. I got a verbal notice from the Army Corps Representative Ben Orn that they had achieved SHPO concurrence for the Surcharge 2 placement and that we were finally going to be able to move forward with a permit. Now I have not seen our permit yet, so I don't know how long that's going to be. I'll continue to pester him at a acceptable rate, but we're anticipating that we should be able to get that surcharge placed this summer, and that would mean we could move forward with the final stage of the turnback project next year if the settlement goes as according to plan. CSAH 16 Trail Project, the final project memorandum was submitted to MnDOT. The final plan should be submitted within the next week or two for approval. And then as we work through some of the Section 4F and other environmental concerns because of the federal dollars, we're anticipating construction will start in July or so. Miscellaneous items. The Maple River School District, as you may know, passed the referendum on a very narrow vote. Yep. They anticipate they plan to put the new K-12 school at the southeast corner of our County State Highway 7 and Borchard Street, so in the very south city limits of the city of Mapleton.
Okay.
They want to have the new school open by the September of 2022, so a very aggressive schedule. I have yet to see an ADA plan for how they anticipate getting the bikers and walkers to the school. I've yet to see a traffic report or a site layout. I saw a preliminary site layout, but they're just really beginning that process. So we are working with their consultant engineer, INS Group, the school district, as well as the city of Mapleton to work on a access location to that property off of CSAH 7. I have informed them that per our access control policy, one access would be permitted off of 7, and then ideally they would construct a second one off of Borchard Street. With that being said, 7 may need up to a half a mile of reconstruction, depending on what the traffic report. I'm certainly anticipating the turn lanes are going to be needed, both a southbound left turn lane in and a northbound right turn lane. In addition to that, if you're going to have pedestrians, bicyclists, etc., and that much extra traffic, it would be probably wise to add traffic calming measures, which typically means changing it from a rural section to an urbanized section, adding curb and gutter. So I'm kind of anticipating a 3-lane road section that may be necessary for that half mile south out of town. We are anticipating that there may be some development as well around the high school. This is a project that we do not have planned in our capital improvement plan. So this would mean that if we add this project, that could be north of $1 million for the county. Even at a 90-10 cost share per our participation policy with the city paying 10%, this would probably require us pushing off a future project.
Yeah.
especially if we see a dip in transportation revenues through our sales tax and our highway user tax distribution fund. So with that being said, just wanted to make the board aware of that potential future project and some of the shifts that may mean in our CIP, and I need a lot of information from the school district and their representatives before we can really have a final determination of what's necessary. Is there any questions on that?
Brunder here. What time frame do we need to have? I mean, they're talking, that's a pretty aggressive schedule to get the school built to me, but what are we looking at as far as when you need answers so that you can move forward with what you want to do?
Good question. I think it'd be very tight to try to get a project shoehorned into 2021 at this point without having any of the information necessary. It may be something that we'd probably look at trying to get out early 2022 and have open right before, it's only a half mile, so it's not a terribly long project, depending on what the city utility needs are. I'm just afraid to move into any level of detailed design on something like that without the answers.
No, I agree.
That they need to provide us. But I think we can make something happen in 22 pretty reasonably, as long as we can shift some of our resources around to cover it.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
But when would they need to get that information to you?
At least by this time next year. So there's some time for it. Typical on a urban reconstruct like that, if we don't have a lot of wetland issues, things like that, 1 year should be a reasonable turnaround.
Okay.
Another unplanned project coming up. The city of Eagle Lake has a failing water main on County Stated Highway 27, which I think is Agency Street, south of 17, which is the main street through town. Basically from 17 all the way south, almost to the South City limits, the water main is failing to the last western street. So with that being said, the water main kind of runs underneath the fog line of the road. So if they do an open cut, they're going to have to remove about half of the road. The pavement condition is deteriorated on that segment. It's by far not the worst we've got in the county, and it's not the best. It would benefit from a 2-inch mill and overlay is what we're anticipating. The segment north of 17 is in very poor condition. In fact, today our crews are cutting some pavement cores, so we know what we have out there and what the in-place pavement, what's left, so that we can plan. But I think I've given the approval to the city that we would be willing to cost participate in a mill and overlay to assist with their project, so that they're not on the hook for that top about 2 inches of bituminous material. So it's due for us to do that regardless. Again, if their city council meeting I sat in on last night online, they're hoping to try to get it out this year, but they're going to be looking at it, if not right away next year. So that's something that we would pull out of our construction contingencies, about $250,000, and assist the city with that project. And again, it's pavement infrastructure that's due. So
Brunder, that road was done about 38 years, well, it was
mid-'80s.
Right after I got out of high school, we did that road. And so the asphalt is getting worn out on it. And they did pop 3 water mains within about a week last winter, all within about 500 feet of each other. So it was, but I don't remember if they did the water main then or not. We probably just did the road.
Patched. Well, I think they did. But I think it was ductile iron, and I don't know if the soils are that corrosive and they didn't have the right cathodic protection or what.
It seems like a short lifespan for a water main, but
it should
at
last
37 years.
Yes.
So, thank you, Ryan.
Yes. Yep. I handed to Jessie, and I'll let her distribute an updated highway user tax distribution fund pamphlets for the board's information for the year 2020. I wasn't sure the new social protocol on handing stuff out. So
We have no idea.
This is a very handy pamphlet that gives you an idea of what our our state aid funds, how they're broken out. And as you can see from fuel tax revenues, license fees, motor vehicle sales tax, and auto parts sales tax and interest and other, it comes to almost $2.5 billion, of which is broken out into the CASA distribution. We end up getting about $674 million that's distributed to 87 counties. So I'd be happy to, I know it's really more an informational item, and it's a good tool for us as we're working with our constituents and our legislators to explain the complexities of transportation funding.
It's a nice piece.
Very
It really
nice.
is.
Yeah, very useful. So I'd left a few
Yeah.
extras in there if you'd like to share any or whatnot. So
I'm one of those weird guys every time. I always like looking at it and going back to it. So
yeah, very, very helpful.
appreciate it.
An update, the April 30th Joint Park Advisory Board County Board meeting has been canceled. We may look at trying to do something in the fall, if possible. Otherwise, it just may be a casualty of current conditions. And last but not least, the greater, I'm not going to get that acronym right now. The Parks of Regional Significance application was submitted on April 1st. The GMRTPC Parks application. So that was submitted in concurrence with the city. So we worked with Mark Kahns from the city of Mankato, and we provided a lot of back and forth. The county submitted the final application on behalf of both the city and the county. So we're hopeful to hear a response from that in the next couple of months, and that may push us to moving forward with a parks master plan for the trail.
It's cool. Where are we on the Stoltzman Trail?
So that's the one, the 16 trail that we're
Yep.
going to submit plans for approval and then ideally begin construction about July.
Okay,
Yep. So
thanks.
we don't have a bid date yet because it is a federal aid project that requires approval both at the MnDOT Central Office and the district office. But we've got it pretty much fully designed, detailed design, just cleaning up a few details, and then we'll get that submitted.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
And we're still doing all our road projects that we had planned to do before.
We are still moving ahead. Construction is an essential service and still moving ahead full steam. I think their contractors are itching to go once load restrictions are lifted. Again, we're prioritizing 41 to get that bridge out, with 27 maybe with the right-of-way acquisition and the permit and current conditions. That one may slide. We'd still like to get some work done on it yet this year, but at least get it out under contract.
Our staff and engineers working from home.
Yeah, so we've got a mixed bag. Stefan and I are kind of trading days in the office and then working from home the other days. Our construction staff, some are working remotely on projects and at home. Those ones have been authorized to take a vehicle home. Our right-of-way staff are working remotely. Our designers are working remotely. Surveyors and a couple of construction staff are still in the office and trying to be out and about as much as possible. We're really looking forward to construction projects beginning because that's a great way for them to stay occupied, stay out of the office, and still be able to practice that distancing that's necessary.
Well, thank everybody at your office and thank all your people with all the work that they do for Blue Earth County. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Ryan.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
And next is our county attorney.
Morning, Pat.
Mr.
Morning, Patrick.
McDermott. Good morning, Pat.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. County Attorney Pat McDermott here. Again, the information contained in the report, I'm open to any questions which you may have. Just a couple of things that I'll just mention briefly. For example, there were 11 people in custody that we had to deal with this morning or are in process of dealing with. So the courts are still open. We're still processing cases. We're just doing the best that we can from a social distancing standpoint. Some of those are appearing by ITV. Some of those are appearing just via phone. But for the most part, people that are in custody will be appearing in the courtroom. We have a number of people that have been and continue to work from home pursuant to the telecommute temporary agreement that you had previously passed. So I guess at this point in time, I'll just open it up. If anyone has any questions, concerns, or comments, please let me know.
So just so I'm clear, the courts are doing, using technology sometimes.
To the best that we can.
Okay.
To the best that they can. We've had ITV for quite some time. I know at the work session there were some questions on ITV, but that is one thing that the courts have used for quite some time. Actually, typically every other Monday, at least, they have a judge take care of all the in custodies via ITV from a different county, whether that's either Jackson County or Watonwan County.
Okay.
I know that you had brought up, Commissioner Landcamer, some of the commitment types of issues, because some of those individuals do, because of lack of resources, end up being placed in Fargo. They have actually, at various points in time, have retained attorneys in that area to appear with some of the individuals, but some of the individuals do have to be transported, and it is a resource drain issue from the sheriff's office when you send somebody 5 hours, come back 5 hours for a 15-20 minute hearing, and then turn around and basically hand off to another deputy to drive 5 hours and then come back 5 hours. So from the technology standpoint, things are getting better as far as that goes, but a lot of times I revert back to what I learned in law school on that issue, and one of my professors said that if you want to try to figure out what the Supreme Court will do, think about what your grandparent would do. So at the age of, we're on the latter half of the technology bubble, so to speak, where it's more difficult for us compared to kids that have grown up with it. So sometimes things don't make sense, but the courts have said over time that it's not their job to make our job easier. So, but they need to make sure that they protect people's rights and just like we do, uphold the Constitution and look at those things. And I believe someone else was going to have, does that answer your question, Commissioner Landcamer?
Yes, it does. The Supreme Court's not in meeting now, though, are they?
I think the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals are all in session because they've been releasing opinions. We've got opinions from the Court of Appeals yesterday. We'll probably get an opinion or two from the Supreme Court tomorrow. Because the Court of Appeals cases are released at 10 a.m. every Monday, and the Supreme Court at 10 a.m. every Wednesday.
I think I'm thinking the U.S. Supreme Court is not meeting.
Maybe they're not
meeting.
I don't remember. Yeah.
Have there been any delays in the civil cases, or are they going ahead as planned with that?
Some of the civil cases, yes. Some of the civil cases, no. And the yes portion would be the civil in the respect to the child protection cases and whatnot.
Yeah.
I do know that we have, and I just was having a conversation this morning regarding, we have a mediation coming up on a property matter that probably will be kicked out because that's not deemed a priority, even though it's mediation. It is part of the court process. And so those types of cases, just like many of the others, and just to reiterate, we would typically average about 200 hearings a week, and now we're averaging between 20 and 30. So there's going to be a point in time we are working with the courts and defense attorneys, and at least on some of the lower level cases, if we can try to take care of all those simply by document, so to speak, even though we're all paperless. I refer to it as doing everything electronically without an appearance. So,
is it safe, Commissioner Peepo, is it safe to say that with the shelter at home that there's a slight decrease in crime activity?
Yes and no. You'll see that as far as I'm concerned, and this is one of the thoughts that I had, and I finally saw it in the media recently, and actually a while ago now, though, a while ago being within the last couple of weeks, domestics are up.
Yeah, that breaks my heart.
But more of the petty offenses are down, but we are spending quite a bit of time sorting through with local law enforcement, trying to figure out, okay, does this business qualify as essential? Does this business not qualify as essential? Is one of the questions yesterday that we have to, drop everything that we're doing is, okay, from a housing standpoint, hotel guest, can they be evicted? Can they not be evicted? So the Attorney General's office is reporting a couple of days ago, one of the first ones, where they are saying, and the order, the executive order says basically it doesn't take care of the responsibility of a person to pay, but essentially no one can be evicted at this point in time, and whether it's temporary housing or long-term housing, and that is the stance that has been taken. So.
Thank you.
Driving violations, DWIs.
We're still seeing that traffic laws are still being enforced. There's an individual in custody today for a DWI, 2 people in custody for DWI. So no, there's still, people are, I know that I received quite a few different people reached out in various means and had questions on the stay-at-home order, what exactly can you or can't you do and whatnot, and concerned about if they're traveling from one place to another, they're going to get stopped, and you're more likely to be stopped for being a crappy driver. That's basically what the bottom line is, because, Mr. Chair, given your background, you'd understand it as well as Commissioner Purvis, that you still need that articulable suspicion to make contact with somebody, whether it's the executive order or whether it's a driving conduct or anything else. So.
But we haven't seen any charges in Blue Earth County for violating the executive order yet, have we, or haven't we?
We have had some that have been referred that we've been talking about and looking into and requesting additional information on.
Businesses or people?
Businesses. Okay. So. Let's see, and there was one thing that I was going to add to that, but I just forgot that quickly. So, but technically, it's up to the Department of Employment and Economic Development making that determination, and there's a process for them to go through to determine if a business qualifies as essential or not. And so that's where I'm directing law enforcement in our office, attorneys in our office. If you have a question, then you should at least run it by deed, because somebody's going to have to say this is the interpretation of the executive order from the Executive Council.
Well, thank you very much.
Anything else?
Anything
with our
else?
deputies, it's also, we want to make sure that they are safe also. So, I mean, it's kind of that both sides thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it online, the list of essential businesses?
That I do not know. I just think it's the interpretation of the executive order and whether they fit in that category or not. Because the executive order did refer to, I believe it was a 13-page handout from FEMA indicating what were essential services, what were essential, and that's where I directed some of employers to, because I had questions from employers and directed them to that handout, and then if that wasn't clear enough to them, to go through deed.
Because I know Chief Deputy Maurer told me that when they get something, they give them a list of the essential, what the order says.
And that may be the FEMA handout, because it's fairly broad in terms and whatnot. But there's just some businesses that are saying, well, we in parts have school supplies, so we need to stay open because we're essential. So it's some of those types of questions that depending on, because it is in some areas pretty subjective. So, but the entire intent and purpose, the entire intent and purpose is the social distancing. So that's what it's basically about. And from that standpoint, that's where people need to start.
All right.
I think with all of this stuff, when the executive order was put in place, you hadn't thought through everything because there wasn't time. And so it's a process. And I think we're seeing that at the federal level and the state level. Every day we learn something new. And so I think we'll still have some ambiguity throughout this process.
Well, I think so, and that's a very good point, Commissioner Landcamber. And I've said for years in the classes that I still teach is, no matter what way you slice it, vertically, horizontally, or otherwise, government is nothing but a process. And if you start from the general premise of Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution, basically say what governments can do, and the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments, say what government can't do. So, and there was some questions regarding the separation of church and state, and that's a balancing factor and whatnot. So, starting with that funnel filter is usually where I go with these generic situations.
Thank you very much for all the work, and please thank your staff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks.
All right, we'll go right into administrative services. Bob?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, the first item is the county board minutes for March 24th as well as March 27th.
Landcamer moves the minutes.
Purvis seconds.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Jesse, could you call a roll?
Commissioner Landcamer,
Aye.
Commissioner People,
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis,
Aye.
Commissioner Brunder,
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg,
Aye. Go ahead, Bob.
The next are the bills for the 2 weeks indicated.
Brunder will move the bills.
People will second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Commissioner Landcamer,
Aye.
Commissioner People,
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis,
Aye.
Commissioner Brunder,
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg,
Aye. That passes.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, item number 5 in your packet is the Human Resources Department agenda. Just have informational items for the board today. We did have a retirement in our Property and Environmental Resources area of a mapping coordinator. We also have a voluntary demotion in our IT department. We had an individual in our probation office that completed employment, and so we've initiated recruitment to refill that position. And then we filled a custody officer and a custodian position. And so be happy to answer any questions if the board has any on the human resources agenda.
No, not a question. It's just the custody officers are still a revolving door.
Right. We continue to see that at a little slower pace, thank
That's good,
goodness.
that's good.
But, you know, as we've hired more law enforcement students, they're getting jobs and in their preferred career. So we will continue to see some of that turnover, I think.
Well, I know the sheriff said that they have 4 new deputies who were jailers, so they're cross-trained in this process.
Yeah,
Well,
they
it's-
continue to work on that.
Yep.
Personally, I know it's good training for a deputy or a police officer to have that training in the jail to know where they're sending them to, because it's you know, there's quite a stress thing going on in the jail, and it's very good training for a police officer or a sheriff's deputy to have that. Dispatch would be the same thing. I'd love to have some of our law enforcement officers have a few months as dispatcher. Then I think they would understand a little bit better. But go
I
ahead.
spent 15 minutes in dispatch one time, and it was the longest 2.5 weeks of my life.
That was my first job as law enforcement, as a dispatcher in Willoughby County, Minnesota, and trust me, you get to respect what goes on there. Go ahead, Bob.
Item number 6 in your packet then is the financial status report. This is the end of our first quarter of our fiscal year. So you'll see the total revenues are at just under 15 million and expenses a little over 20 million. So again, with those first half property taxes not coming in until May, we'll continue to see that deficit situation in our budget. Couple of points to note. State and federal revenue is up over last year. You may recall that as we reviewed these reports last year at this time, I was making note of the fact that state and federal revenue seemed to be lagging. Fortunately, this year we've seen that improvement, and we're a lot closer to our budget targets there. The transportation sales tax is right on the mark for our budget through the end of the first quarter. I suspect that will change as we go through the rest of the year, given the current state of the economy. Our interest on investments also, are down some from last year. And I think it's going to be a challenging year in that regard. So we'll continue to watch that. On the expense side, everything seems to be lining up well. You'll see in that building and equipment purchase line that we're likely to see quite a disparity between last year and this year just because of the building project being wrapping up. So you'll see those numbers look different throughout the year. Down at the bottom of the first page is the enterprise fund. That is our Ponderosa landfill. You'll see that expenses exceed revenues there as well. And that largely is some of the investments we're putting into additional cell development as well as some large capital equipment purchases. But I think that will level out a little bit throughout the year. The second page has our cash and investment balances. You'll see that our total funds available are about $40 million compared to a 6-month operating needs of $54 million. So as we talk about potential property tax relief and stuff, it's just important to keep in mind that our total funds available are a little higher, and we can probably absorb some of that, but we are seeing that that 6-month availability is higher than where we are in our available funds. We obviously have those dedicated funds, and as long as we can draw on those, we're fine. So we have a total cash of about $107 million in the bank compared to about $114 million the year before. Be happy to answer any questions the board might have.
I believe that the COVID-19 epidemic really shows that the staff, the administration, and not so much the current county commissioners, but the ones in the past have done an amazing job to be able to give us a somewhat of a buffer when the tax issues come in. If we didn't have an extra amount of money, we would be hurting a lot more than what we are, and I believe some counties will be. The same thing with the state of Minnesota. I mean, they had a $2 billion rainy day fund, along with that they're talking it's going to be taken out because of this COVID-19. But if we didn't have that $2 billion, I can only imagine what the state of Minnesota would be looking at, and what other states are looking at that don't have that. We're pretty blessed to have the insight to be able to keep those extra funds there.
Well, Mr. Chair, you're correct. We are very fortunate to have a solid fund balance to get us through rainy days, and it certainly feels like it's raining now. You've asked...
Like cats and dogs.
So some of your members have asked in the past, where should our fund balance be? Well, this is an indicator of how quickly things can move. We've gone in a month's time from feeling very positive about where our county budget is at to having quite a few concerns starting to creep into the conversation and where this is going to end up. Fortunately, the federal government is increasing some of our revenue sources. They've increased the federal participation rate on some of our human service programs, which will help, but I don't know if it'll be enough. And certainly if the state's budget surplus is gone and they need to balance their budget in a different way, that flows downhill, and we are downhill, so we will feel the impacts of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the work you've done.
Thank you.
So we'll jump right into our commissioner reports. Commissioner Landcamer, you want to start us off?
I would love to. I seem to be spending about 3 or 4 hours a day on conference calls. And when we talk about ambiguity, every day when I'm talking to NACO or AMC or somebody else, things change. The White House has a call today from Treasury that says, we're going to explain to you what the stabilization fund is, which is $150 billion that goes to state and local governments. I signed up half hour after it came out, and they told me all the lines were gone. So that's the only one I haven't been able to get on. But I think when you look at every time I listen to something, a little more comes out. The $150 billion stabilization fund, Treasury is responsible for doing grants and either sending it to states or counties that are over 500,000 people, of which we are not one. So we're going to have to go through the state. But Treasury's never done this. And so it's going to be extremely challenging when they have no expertise to do this. And they're also saying that, I'm throwing my whole thing into one because it's all interconnected, that they won't tell you what's allowable until after it's expended, and then if they don't think you should have done that, then you'll have to pay it back. The rules and regs aren't out there. It's extremely, extremely confusing. And as I said, every day there's something new, a new clarification. NACO's working extremely hard with Treasury to have a voice in this. And according to NACO, Matt, they've been willing to listen, but they have not done this before, so it's extremely challenging. AMC did a great job yesterday, I thought, and they've had webinars all along explaining what the state legislature did. I think that the state, did some really good things, but it's not going to be enough. They had a $1.5 million surplus. It is gone. And as the chair said, now they're going into the rainy day fund, and how long is that going to last? And so I think that may we live in interesting times is probably going to be the mantra, because they're going to be extremely interesting. So I think all we can do is to continue to hear what our national associations talking about, what our state association is talking about, working with our legislators to try to figure out how do we get through this. And I think one of the big questions is, how long does it last? If it's a long time, we're in deeper trouble than we thought we were. So I have a million things to talk about, but I think you stay tuned, because tomorrow it'll change again.
Well, thank you very much.
Yep.
Commissioner Brunder?
Well, after our last board meeting, I have had a couple in-person meetings, but very, very few. Everything we've been doing is by conference call. We had some planning and zoning stuff we had to look at, an issue, and we were out in an area that was appropriate to meet in person, and talked about that issue. Our EMS board, my MVAC board, again, I'll probably combine these all together because they're all kind of the same thing. All the committees that I sit down were by conference call, and all of them talking about the very same thing, the concern about the funding, how we're going to deal with the funding, the very question of they're giving the money out, but it might not be your money, so clawback is always an issue that we have to deal with. Just another new realm that we have to deal with as commissioners and our committees, because I was on the phone with Amanda Mackey this morning, and Head Start's got a lot of money. They're pushing some grants out and stuff for us, but again, we're really not sure. So, my suggestion is we put it in the bank. We take the money, obviously. Yeah. We put it in the bank, and then after all the dust settles, let's make sure it's our money before we start spending it, unless we have to. So, I think that's probably the biggest concern that I've heard out there, is just really and being a small business owner too, I'm trying to figure out if there's anything out there that for the small businesses in my area and in my district that they can get help with. But it's just so, even if I was a small business owner and got a loan, I wouldn't spend it until I knew it was my money, because I would be a little concerned that, we gave it to you, but you really didn't qualify, so now you got to give it back. So I think there's going to be some huge challenges, a lot of influx of money, but again, not really how we're going to divvy it up and give it out. So we are starting to get a little bit more back to a new normal for meetings. I mean, everybody's getting used to conference calls, Zoom. The meeting by office meeting or whatever by people. So people are getting used to it. And I see some changes coming and staying after this is done, because do we really need to travel all over the place? And you get comfortable with the conference calling and stuff. It works pretty well. It doesn't work as well when you have something that's a little bit controversial. It's much better to have that conversation in person with your colleagues than it is over a phone, but we'll just have to muddle through it for now. So that's my report, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Purvis?
Mine's very similar to everybody else's. Majority of my in-face meetings have been canceled. We've been conducting business with on the phone with Zoom and stuff like that. Probably the one significant thing we've done is our new executive director of Detox has 6 months review, and she's doing an excellent job. Revenues are up. We're taking more people, especially the ones that we had not been taking, the ones that were on meth before, and we've decided that we need to take them. So we've made that change at Detox, and it's been a service that was really needed for the community. So that's a positive thing on that. But other than that, that's my report.
Commissioner People?
Pretty much the same, like they canceled the townships, and P&Z, planning and zoning, all those are canceled. Did have a Partners for Affordable Housing by phone and Zoom, or I think it was that, and that, we have the problems like others, because we got obviously staff involved with the shelters and have close proximity people, and it's a challenge. And then of course our funding sources, they have to watch, see how that goes. So it's like any other, most organizations. Then we did have let's see, special. We had our meeting Friday on that one Friday, the 27th, on our COVID-19, the board, and then we had a work session on the 31st of March, and then Kip and we did have RCF a phone meeting yesterday before your MVAC, and that it's harder to deal with it if it's some issues of interest or a little controversial or whatever to handle over the phone. But I don't really want this to be a trend for most things. I'd rather have face-to-face. And as a society, or as on a bigger note, like the business that I've been formerly in, that's actually essential, but I think that there's going to be a balancing thing sometime between the virus and our economic vitality, or if to continue this, it's going to be tough, because you continue too long and it'd be pretty tough to recover, I think, totally. So like I say, it's kind of out of our hands, but I worry about that down the road, that this isn't going to be too long. But
we all hope.
Yep, that's more of obviously a little bit higher than us, I guess. But anyway, that is my report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. This is Commissioner Stuenberg. We're all in the same boat. I had a finance committee for TDS, and that was over the phone. I joined in on some webinars while I had a NACO transportation meeting on the 26th. That was over the phone, obviously, but then we had a rural stakeholder for the COVID-19. On the 27th, we had our board meeting here, a special meeting. I had a transportation Transportation Alliance on Monday the 30th. That was obviously over the phone. And then we had our work session here on the 31st, which really gave us an insight as to what everybody's doing in the county and how things are working. And that was a very, very enlightening meeting. Yesterday, I sat in on the AMC webinar on the COVID-19, and you know, number one, we're really lucky we have AMC and the professional people there. They do an amazing job. But you look at what the state's going through and what the budget issues are going to be in the future. We've got some hard parts coming, and I think we all know that. One thing I would like to bring up is our meeting here and whether we could live stream our board meeting. I don't know, Bob, if you'd want to talk about that, or what's the possibility? I mean, people can join in on the phone, and I appreciate that. But if we had live streaming going on, that would give in time. I mean, people, we wouldn't have to use the phone anymore. They could see what's going on as we're doing it. Obviously, it's a possibility. I know our church does it. I don't know, they did it long before the COVID-19 issues came up. But what's the issue there? What does it cost more? What, do we need more? Would our recording people need more equipment? What would we need for that?
We'd have to explore all those issues, quite frankly, Mr. Chair. We have been looking into how do we conduct public hearings into the future, because obviously this approach we're taking now is challenging to conduct public hearings. So we've been exploring different options on how we might get back to planning and zoning public hearings, ditch hearings, those sorts of things. Live streaming can be done fairly quickly, I believe. We would need to talk with our contractor about how that might happen. It's the public input portion that is, to me, more challenging in terms of how do we do that. AMC has been looking into this issue to some degree and putting out some best practice recommendations, but I think the real challenge for all of us in local government is how do we make sure that people have feeling that they're active in their participation on issues that they care about. And so that public comment portion doesn't really get fully addressed with live streaming. And so we need to figure out that piece, in my opinion.
But the public input part wouldn't be an issue for our board meetings, because unless we have somebody that calls in advance and wants to talk, and we could actually do that with a Zoom type of a thing if they want to do that. But
right.
In our board meetings, we don't have the public input portion unless somebody calls in advance. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
So that would be a minimal issue for our board meetings. I can see for ditch hearings and different things like that may cause a problem, and we might have to do different things. But I'm just throwing it out there, trying to figure out how we could make this more transparent to all the people that really want to see the board meeting as it happens, not 3 days later.
Those are challenges, again, that local governments are facing currently. Obviously, we've put our videos out on our website and on public television, but it is delayed, just to your point. And so we can certainly look further into that if that's the wishes of the board.
And that's, obviously, this isn't up to me. It's up to the whole board, but it's something that I would be interested in for us to look into.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And,
Wait,
yes,
I'm going to add to your report.
you go right ahead.
I will. Vance and Bob and I, and Vance was a speaker, had a conversation with Senator Klobuchar last week about issues that are impacting counties. Vance did a great job. It was the mayor of Mankato, the chair of the Blue Earth County
Yeah, I
Board.
guess I didn't mention that.
You
did I?
didn't. I'm helping you out. The two health care systems, Mayo and the Mankato Clinic, GMG, talked about issues that the senator needs to know about, and it was a really good conversation. And her comment was, "I learned a lot. This is really good." So having that open communication is really, I think, important. And to add another thing on, Congressman Hagedorn had a town hall meeting virtually last week, and it was really nice of him to do that and to take questions and that type of thing. So I think we're really fortunate that our elected officials are interested in what the impact on the county is. Just thought I'd
Thank you very much.
share that.
Thanks for bringing that up. And with that, we need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Purvis makes that motion.
Second by People.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Jesse, you want to call the vote?
Commissioner Landcamer,
Aye.
Commissioner People,
Aye.
Commissioner Purvis,
Aye.
Commissioner Brunder,
Aye.
Chair Stuenberg.
Aye. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.